But let's bring in Simon Clark, an Associate Professor in Cellular Microbiology at the University of Reading, to discuss this. Thank you very much for your time. So clearly global concern. This is a strain that's not as common as the very deadly Zaire Ebola strain, but it's still very deadly. Bundibugyo strain. What can you tell us about that strain and why it's particularly concerning?
It's particularly concerning because whereas with the Zaire strain you can get some element of treatment with a vaccine, that vaccine doesn't work against this strain, so there is no way of controlling it. There's no vaccine to prevent it or treat it, because you can sometimes use vaccines to do that, and there's no drug to treat it either. So really all the World Health Organization and the local authorities can do is to identify people who have been into contact with those who are infected, isolate them, and do things like swabbing people to see if they've got the infection, and making sure that when people die and are buried, that they don't contaminate other people.
From what we know of that area, it's difficult. It's difficult to access. There is some fighting in certain parts of the DRC, and there are small villages with a high amount of people moving between them. So how difficult is this going to be to control?
With those challenges, it will be quite difficult. They make, that makes things more troublesome, harder to get a grip on. And that's the basic problem here, that there appears to be quite a lot of fairly rapid spread. And sooner or later, it's like throwing a rock into a pond. It will spread out from where it is localized into bigger cities, and then eventually it could escape the area, escape that part of Africa, and cause trouble in other parts of the world.
My understanding is that while there has been one case of Ebola in the UK, that was someone who travelled directly from the DRC in a previous outbreak. How good are the controls in terms of when people leave the region? It's about monitoring who gets on the aeroplanes, checking temperatures, and then checking on the other side.
Well, there is a solid effort there, but of course it's not foolproof. People are really only show symptoms when they're infective, or they're only infected when they're showing symptoms, I should say. And so it requires a further layer of checks in places like the UK and other parts of the world to ensure that anybody who has passed those checks locally but is infected, and they couldn't tell at the time, is picked up.
Any chance that the vaccine developed for the more common strain could provide some protection for this strain?
It appears not, no. I imagine there'll be some work in this area, and maybe they can find something, but my understanding currently is that no, it doesn't work. I have seen some reports of vaccines being developed against this version, but they're still very much in the lab, and as far as I'm aware, and they certainly won't be rolled out quickly.
Given that it's such a terrible disease, this is a hemorrhagic disease, you just bleed to death essentially, is my understanding, and mortality can be as high as 90%. Why don't we have vaccines for the different strains? I believe there's about 4 of them.
Yeah, because it's not that big a problem in the West. That's a rather harsh way of putting it, but it is the truth. There are other things which are a bigger problem in the developed world, and they gobble up the research funding.
All right, thank you so much for your time. That is Simon Clark, Associate Professor in Cellular Microbiology at the University of Reading.